You're listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility. And now, here are your hosts, Sarah and Esteban.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 144.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Back on Track. Dog agility is a demanding sport and can be difficult on the body, both the dogs and the humans. Back on Track specializes in dog blankets, beds, and wraps that keep muscles warm and reduce the pain in joints. If you've got a nagging knee, calf, or ankle injury, Back on Track's human products can help get you back in the ring. Visit Back on Track at backontrackproducts.com.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a patented blend of unique fatty acid oils designed to safely and effectively keep joints and muscles at their best to maximize performance and shorten recovery time. 1TDC is the next generation of fatty acids beyond glucosamine and fish oil and is used by many current and past national agility champions and world team members. Bad Dog Agility listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at BDA1TDC.com. That's BDA, the number 1, TDC.com. 1TDC makes dog athletes and pets happy. Don't wait, start today.
Today we're talking about behavior problems in performance dogs, and we have a very special guest, Sarah Stremming of Cognitive Canine, and she's got her very own podcast, Cog-Dog Radio, and I love that name, by the way. I love that she brought back radio into podcasting. I like that. It's classy. And we're very excited to have her on. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We seem to have a lot of Sarahs on our podcast. It's totally confusing as we try to address each other, but we'll try to keep everybody straight here. But yeah, welcome to the podcast where we were very excited to see an agility podcast pop up on iTunes.
Yeah, I was surprised how few actually dog-related podcasts there are in general.
Not only does she have a really good podcast, every once in a while I see a really good article that's shared on Facebook, and then it's always the same person. I'm like, who's this Sarah Stremming lady? Right, writing all these profound, interesting things, because, a lot of things pass in front of your eyes on Facebook. A lot of it is not that worth reading or, very pithy kind of things. But every once in a while you get that high quality stuff. And, I don't think it's a coincidence that it was coming from you. And then when I wandered over to your actual website, I saw that you had a podcast. And so I went, listened to the first one. It was great. So I had to listen to the second one. And of course, I had to listen to the third one, and so on and so forth. And now you've got 6 podcasts. You've been releasing them every 2 weeks, and you've set up a very interesting format for how you do these podcasts. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I've been writing the blog for a while. I really enjoy that, and I release a blog every week. When I got down to really wanting to talk about specific cases that I had worked on, I started to try to do that in blog format, and it really wasn't working. And actually, a friend of mine suggested that I try a podcast for it instead, and so that's what happened. So what I'm doing is basically releasing 3 episodes per case study that I want to talk about. So we just covered, the first one was a golden retriever named Jade. And so I basically do 2 podcasts where I just talk about the case, and then in the final podcast, I interview the dog's handler.
Mm-hmm. And that was the clincher for me, because I was actually somewhat familiar with Jade, and of course, Jade's handler, having a golden retriever myself, and now, my elder statesperson golden retriever, she is 16. I think she's going to be 17. So I've been around golden retrievers in agility for a very long time, and that's when I knew we just had to have you on this podcast. And the format that you've done there is very, very interesting. And one thing you do at the end of it, which I think is coming up for your second client case, the German Shepherd, but hasn't happened yet. So I'm on pins and needles waiting for this podcast, is you talk with the owner after you go through the case.
Yeah.
And I think it's really helpful, insightful, and kind of gives the listener some closure.
And I think it's really also very validating about everything that you've done with the dog, because, it's sometimes hard for us to talk about the problems that we have with our dog. There's a lot of taboo there when you when your dog isn't perfect. And so to have the owners come on and to have the confidence to talk about, their mistakes or the things that they changed or their perspective on what you had them do and how it helped them is, really validates everything that you'd put into the previous 2 episodes.
Yeah, I think so. I really like having them put kind of their 2 cents in at the end because, first of all, it's their dog. They do the bulk of the work. I just tell them what to do. And so, they're really doing the legwork. And most of my, not all of my clients, I think, would be into talking on the podcast, but, I pick them based on whether they would be into that or not. And most of them are really excited, actually, to talk about their dog and the journey that they've kind of been on. But like you said, a lot of those things are taboo and kind of hard to talk about. So I hope to give them kind of a platform to talk about it because really they've all got problems. And really, we should all be kind of talking about those things, I think, a little bit more in order to just kind of take that taboo away. It's kind of silly. They're all dogs. And we should all be talking about all of their, wide array of behaviors.
Well, let's take a step back. So what kind of behavior problems are you dealing with? What do people who are competitors bringing to you?
Well, primarily, I'm dealing with issues that have to do with arousal. So maybe over-arousal in the trial environment, sometimes under-arousal, or sometimes just kind of stress that comes out in different ways. But in general, it's dogs that have some kind of problem in the trial environment, whether it is that they can't perform the same way that they do in training in a trial, or if they have, or sometimes they have really specific behavioral concerns. So like with Jade, he had some issues with other dogs. So they've got to be around a lot of other dogs to be at agility trials. So that's a big problem right off the bat. And then he also had a really chronic problem of biting and body slamming his handler during both training and trialing. All of it related to him just being over-adrenalized and not able to cope with the high state of arousal that dogs are in agility. And then sometimes it's more anxiety related. Sometimes the dog is more shut down, and that's why they can't perform. And that's more the German Shepherd that I'm talking about in the second set of podcasts.
Now, if you had to completely make up a number, what percentage would you say of agility dogs out there might have some of the issues that you're talking about, say, in a very severe way where they really, really need professional help, and maybe in a more mild way where people they learn to manage it themselves and they kind of deal with it, self-taught?
The dogs have really severe problems. It's a smaller percentage. I think all of them need help if they've got a problem, but the really, really severe problems, most of those dogs, I think people choose to stop running, just period. And they don't keep pursuing it because it's that much work for them. But I would say maybe 2%, maybe 5% have a really big problem. And then I would say almost all of them are dealing with some level of this all the time.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I was thinking. I totally agree, because we gravitate as agility handlers to dogs that have high arousal. We need high arousal to get that speed. And with that high arousal is going to come some amount of problems that we need to know how to address in our training.
Absolutely. Like I said, I think almost all of them. And a lot of it is the dogs that we gravitate towards. And a lot of it is the environment that we ask them to be in. If we really even think about the agility environment and think about how much is going on and how much sensory input the dogs have to deal with all the time, it's not surprising that most of them are having a hard time coping.
Right. I will absolutely, I'm going to admit something. And what I'm going to admit is that when I first saw the podcast, I knew I wanted to listen to it because it's an agility podcast, and we have an agility podcast, and we listen to lots of podcasts about all kinds of topics, sports and, all that kind of stuff. But I wasn't anticipating enjoying it based on like the subject matter, right? Or thinking that it's, going to be boring, or thinking that it's not going to be applicable because of the phrase case study,
Right.
to me kind of just doesn't evoke like ooh, that sounds fun sort of feeling. But I would encourage everybody to listen, because as I listened to these podcasts, I immediately knew that I wanted to have you on the podcast, and I started taking notes, and I had all of these little, just little one-line things, mentally tired, not mentally taxed, perimeter search, just little, notes to myself about things that, whether or not I'm having a problem, made me think about things that I could do better for my dog. So, I think there were a lot of great nuggets of wisdom in how you address these dogs that is absolutely applicable to every agility handler.
Yeah, all of them. I think that everybody could be probably doing a little bit better to help their dog deal with the agility environment, and just accepting that it's a tough environment for dogs. And we should be doing a little bit better to help them cope with it. And that's not to say, I'm obviously not one of these people, and there are plenty of them in the behavior world, who think that agility is probably a bad thing for dogs. I'm definitely not one of those people. I definitely am obsessed with agility. I definitely compete with my dogs. But I see a lot of people just really not seeing, or sometimes disregarding, the dog's inability to kind of take in the environment, process it, and then function.
Yeah, I think one of the really great things that you were doing in the podcast is kind of normalizing this range of behavior from dogs just in general, especially when you think about, say, a golden retriever. You think of them as great dogs with everybody, great with other dogs, great with people, great with kids. And when you have a dog that doesn't, fit into that, I guess, public perception, there can be some issues. But just saying that, young intact males, well, that there are going to be some behavioral commonalities amongst them, I think, that aren't any different than if you got a bunch of 7th and 8th grade boys and you, shoved them all on a basketball court and said, okay, let's start competing at this sport here. You're going to have issues. And so just, I think, normalizing that. And when I thought about it, I was like, I really don't know very much about dog behavior. And I think over the years, I've had to learn to try and see things from their perspective a little bit more. And I find myself constantly surprised because, when I go to a trial, I feel very comfortable now. I've been in the sport for a long time. I've been in the building before. You bring in your new dog there, you don't think twice about it. But completely new environment, potentially overwhelming. And, always a little taken aback when, your dog doesn't seem to be as comfortable as you.
Definitely. I think that a lot of people, people also don't see the really subtle signs of discomfort in their dogs. They notice when the dog starts to have a big problem. So basically they notice, when they stop getting that qualifying score because their dog can't stay on the start line, can't hold their contacts, can't, generally speaking, perform the way that they believe they've trained the dog to perform. Or the dog, snaps or snarls at another dog outside of the ring. That's usually really alarming to people because they didn't see the build-up getting to that point.
And you're speaking from experience as well. So you have some empathy with your clients as well. So tell us a little bit about your own dogs.
I don't get to have normal dogs. I really accept it. I feel like, what is normal anyway? I don't really think that exists. But in general, I say that because I say I don't get to have normal dogs because I feel like I learn a lot from every dog that I train and run. My first competition dog, Kelso, who I talked about in my first podcast, he was severely dog aggressive from a very young age. And I was a teenager and it was basically a nightmare. There was a lot of really bad advice thrown my way that was well-intentioned. Everybody I worked with was very much trying to help me. And so he struggled a lot. And because of his discomfort with other dogs, and I have to say I see this widely. I see this in so many dogs that it really bears mentioning. His discomfort with other dogs manifested in slow, lackluster agility. Even though He was a nice border collie who liked me, liked to work. Being in that environment around other dogs that he was uncomfortable with made it impossible for him to run fast. And so not only was I struggling to manage him outside of the ring, but he also wasn't running very well inside of the ring. So he had the whole gamut. And then my current dog, Iggy, has definitely not been without her own struggles, all of them really different from his. Some of them struggles with arousal. A lot of it struggles with separation anxiety that I didn't even realize was going on for probably too long. So, at a trial, they've got to be in a crate away from you for a lot of the day. And so if the dog is concerned about that, that's going to be affecting everything else. And so, that's Iggy. She's definitely got more subtle problems that I've worked through that I'm just grateful that I had Kelso with these big, fat, glaring problems for me to learn from and then be able to see more subtleties in her so that I could prevent her from having really huge, major problems. And then my puppy, Felix, he's 14 months old and he's absolutely wonderful. He's definitely has more of a hair trigger arousal state like a lot of border collies do, in that he pretty much goes from 0 to 60 very fast, and fast moving dogs are hard for him to take in. And so with him, my primary focus is just helping him to always be comfortable before I ask him to work, which is something that I'm planning on talking more about in podcasts coming up, as well as a workshop that I'm going to teach in Washington. It's basically about making sure that the dog is okay mentally before you ask them to work for you. And I think that's something would be worth putting into agility curriculums across the board. And I don't think that not only do people not see that as being important, but they maybe don't even understand how to put that in.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of the things that you talk about, a lot of the issues that you see are easier to prevent than they are to solve once there's a problem. And so having some amount of this information available or teaching it to people who do agility at all, regardless of what their dog does or what kind of problems their dog does, I think would be very beneficial.
Definitely everything much easier to prevent than solve. Definitely across the board.
Right. That's like a life lesson right there.
Yeah, everything. And for me, I always say that no disrespect, because I taught group agility classes for a long time, and I have a lot of respect for the people that do that. I find that there is a really blatant disregard on the part of agility instructors concerning the emotional well-being of the dogs under their instruction. I think they kind of feel like that's not their area. That's not what they're here to talk about. And so they're here to teach you how to do agility and not the other stuff. And I think a really well-rounded curriculum would involve the dog's emotional state, recognizing the dog's emotional state, how to help them cope better if they're not coping very well, and how to be sure that you are asking them if they're okay before you ask them to work.
That's a really great point. And I wanted to say that before, we teach agility, obviously, and people come to you and they bring you a lot of their problems. And, with a lot of dogs, you see that element of anxiety, stuff is going on there. But as straight up dog trainers, agility trainers, I can help them fix their rate of reinforcement, their reward placement, and, help them structure their lessons different. But those are the kind of issues where I look at it and say, hey, that's beyond me. But now that we've got you on the podcast, we've got a place to send these people. And that's why I'm really, really excited. But it's interesting that you mentioned that it should be a required part of any agility curriculum, that someone might offer. And I think we need to think about that even for ourselves. So it's, that'd be something that, wow, we should even talk about on a different day. Like, aside from this podcast, that you could provide that kind of education for instructors. Now, I'm not talking about to the
level
and expertise that you are providing your clients, but having some basic knowledge of being able to deal with, more mild type cases and we run into this in medicine all the time, as a family practitioner, a little bit about everything, but you also need to know when to refer out, when to seek the specialist's help in managing an issue for a patient. So, I think that would be a very, very good thing.
Really, really, yes, really important. I think that the other issue, the other side of things that I've definitely seen is sometimes agility instructors actually trying to give behavioral advice because they feel trapped and they feel like the dog really needs help and they're not really sure what else to do when they should refer out. So knowing when to send them elsewhere is really important. And I'm glad you brought that up. Being able to help people prevent these problems, I think, should be part of an agility instructor's repertoire. Solving the problems doesn't necessarily have to be.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good distinction. Identification versus, the action plan. So one of the things that you mentioned in multiple episodes, is 4 steps to behavioral wellness. It's sort of a recurring theme. So, if you don't mind, give us a little highlights view of your 4 steps to behavioral wellness.
Okay. So the 4 steps, that's something I came up with a long time ago when I was primarily working with pet owners with behavior problems and really seeing that most of these dogs just weren't having basic needs met. And if their basic needs are not being met, any behavior modification work that you try to do is not going to happen. So I divided into 4 areas. I divided into exercise, nutrition, enrichment, and communication. Exercise to me is a big one. I talk a lot about tiring versus taxing exercise. I think a lot of the exercise we're providing, a lot of physical exercise that we're providing our dogs is actually mentally taxing on them. It's hard for them. And so then you're actually just kind of digging yourself deeper into your hole. If the dog has problems with, maybe anxiety or arousal. For instance, if we go back to Jade, we always go back to Jade. The bulk of his exercise was actually chasing a ball in a big park. So he's this powerful, as you guys are familiar with these field-bred golden retrievers. He's super powerful, tons of energy. And so Emily, his human, being a student, she would walk him to a nearby park and she would throw a tennis ball for him until he was really tired. And she felt like she was doing a good job getting him some nice exercise every day. And he was certainly well-muscled. He was certainly in great condition. But he would go home and then engage in compulsive behaviors. So staring at the vents in the house, compulsively digging and chewing at grass, and also chewing at himself. So these are all, we would call them obsessive compulsive behaviors in people. They're just referred to as compulsive in dogs. And when I saw him around toys and I saw this kind of maniacal attitude that he would start to get around a ball, that's when I suggested maybe we stop doing that. Maybe that's not the best form of exercise for him. That form of exercise was very taxing on Jade. That's not a part of his life anymore. Jade now does off-leash hiking almost every day. And Emily really goes out of her way. When people say they can't do that, I laugh at them because she is a student and then she works a night shift at a hospital and then she drives into the mountains at 4 a.m. and takes her dog for a run in the mountains. So he gets the best kind of exercise for him now, which I think for all dogs is off-leash running around in a natural area. I know that can't always be done safely. I've definitely gotten a lot of flack for even suggesting it. So I definitely want everybody to take safety into account, but off-leash running around in a natural area, I think is the best kind of exercise. And so that's step 1. Step 2 is nutrition. This is another area that I hesitate to even talk about. I am not a nutritionist or a veterinarian. I can only talk about what works for me and what anecdotally I've seen work for my clients. Basically, fresh food greater than processed food. That's pretty much the the end of it, everybody kind of knows that's true. Everybody knows that's true for people. People know that's true for dogs. If they're being fed a commercial diet, we always want to make sure it's a commercial diet that's working for them. So, what's their hair coat look like? What's their, GI process? Is the dog functioning the way it's supposed to be functioning? So always considering the nutrition portion. And then the next step is environmental enrichment. So dogs are a hunter-scavenger species. They want to be searching for food. And then we put food in a bowl and put it in front of them. And a lot of agility people do better because the dogs do work for some of their caloric intake every day because they're training. But having enrichment activities that don't actually involve training, that just involve the dog problem solving to get food, can be an enormous help for their mental health. I've seen a lot of anxiety cases really get better just with this piece alone. So what I'm talking about is there's a lot of puzzle toys and things like that on the market now. So you can buy things for the dog to do, or I just make stuff up. So I stuff food, in a Tupperware underneath a bunch of plastic bottles, right? So the dog has to dig through and get it out. And then I might make that harder by putting it under a blanket. And then I might make it harder by securing the blanket with rocks. So just saying to the dog, there's food in here, figure out how to get it. And then you're not helping them. And you see their confidence grow and you see them take a long nap after eating because it wore them out to just find all of that food. And that's really good for them. And then the final piece is communication. I really find that, again, agility people usually doing better, usually have some kind of communication system with their dogs as far as telling the dog when they're right and maybe even telling the dog when they're wrong. But for me, having a really specific communication system in the home is important. So I always say to try to replace correction with instruction. So instead of, no, cut it out, telling the dog what you would like them to do, like go lie on the bed, come do a hand target, sit, lie down, any of those basic things that you can teach with positive reinforcement and then using those to interrupt behaviors you don't like, that can help really reduce stress on the part of the dog. Because if you think about them, they don't know what the rules are, right? They're just being told constantly to stop doing this and stop doing that. So it's helpful if you can actually tell them what to do. And then on the other side of it, I really like to do something that is suggested by Kathy Sadeo, who I know you guys interviewed. And she calls it SMART times 50, stands for see, mark, and reward training. And then times 50 is just that it's your goal to do it 50 times a day. And all that means is that you see the dog doing something right. You mark it. So you could use a clicker or you could use just a marker word, yes. And then you just give them a piece of food. So all around my house, I have little Tupperwares full of food. And if I see the dog choosing to do something right, I try to remember to tell them that's right. Then I go to the Tupperware, then I get them a piece of food. And when I get people to implement this, and the more dogs you have, the harder it is, of course, because the harder everything is.
Right.
And so that's just that other little piece of just getting people to give the dog feedback. Tell the dog when they're right, and then tell the dog what you prefer they're doing when they're not right.
Yeah, I really like that approach because I feel like it's also good human training because it forces you to go out and reward your dog. And it can be easy over time to kind of forget to do that. And actually, when your dog is being well behaved, you may not even want to disturb them. You don't want to mess with a good thing, right? So it's like a great way to get reinforcement rate up, to get people to practice watching for, good behavior and rewarding it.
Right. Kathy Sadeo says that, her goal is to make you a more keen observer of your dog's behavior. And that's perfect. The better we can all be at that, the better we're going to be at selecting the behaviors we like and building those good behaviors as we go.
Well, I've already mentioned that I'm very, very excited about having you on the podcast, and I definitely don't want to give away all of your secrets, but I wanted me and Sarah each to pick one thing that we found interesting in your podcast, and I'm going to go first. And what I found interesting was your discussion about mouth pressure when the dog is taking a treat. Did I steal that from you?
You did steal that
one. And the reason I was so fascinated by it, because way back in like 2002, when I got my very first Border Collie, I'd only been in the sport for a couple of years. And I'm so excited. I'm taking a private lesson from a really great instructor, and we go there and the dog wouldn't take any treat. And my first thought was, I picked the wrong treat. Why isn't this dog taking any treats? But, fortunately the instructor knew that, the dog was experiencing some stress there. And so, a well-bred, high drive Border Collie who was young and, eventually went on to have a very, very nice career. But that was the first time I'd run into that. And then when I heard you again talking about this, I thought, I think we've had some dogs that you could apply this to. So could you tell us just a little bit about that and whet the appetite for our audience?
Sure. The way that dogs kind of interact with food can tell you really just a world of information about their emotional state, which is why, and it's so extremely common for people to say, not even only their young Border Collies, but how many people do you know whose Border Collie doesn't eat?
Right, yeah.
Or who won't eat around agility. And to me, I think we need to recognize that as not so much a normal breed trait, the way that it's kind of being perpetuated as, but as information about that dog's emotional state. And so I would say, not taking food, that's a really high sign of stress. If the dog's not eating, the dog is in kind of preservation mode. If you can think of a time when you were having high anxiety or high stress, if you're having kind of mild stress, a lot of people will eat more during that time. But if you're having really high anxiety, you don't want to eat at all. Your body says, why would you be thinking about that right now? We're in fight or flight here, right? And so if the dog's not taking treats, that's a big clue to you. You've got to back up. You've got to help them be more comfortable. If the dog is taking food, but they're taking it hard, so their mouth is sharkier than normal, that tells you that they're, again, experiencing a high level of stress. So not taking food is, we're in distress. We got to get out of here. Taking food really hard is that our stress levels are definitely spiking. I always say that the mouth is a barometer of stress. So how hard they're taking the food gives you information. Whether they're not taking the food gives you a lot of information. And then in the case of Iggy, she kind of has a hard mouth. It's very hard if she's really stressed. But if her mouth gets soft, I know we're kind of in trouble here. She's pretty stressed out if she's taking treats soft. That means she's just kind of one step up from not taking the treat at all.
So it's also a matter of knowing your dog, and what's normal for them.
So many dogs aren't going to stop eating no matter what. I mean, we definitely know those dogs as well who are going to keep eating even if they're pretty stressed out. And then we know dogs that aren't super hot on food. So taking treats kind of soft or kind of needing high value treats is normal for them. So you definitely do want to know your dog, but food, I could talk for another 45 minutes, honestly, on how much information you can get from the way that the dog is eating or taking food. But that's kind of the bare bones of it.
Right. And so I'll put mine with Esteban's because it was also kind of part of the same discussion, was pairing that barometer of your dog taking treats with something like the perimeter sweep. So that's my thing. That's my little tidbit that I wanted you to share because I really like that idea too.
Sure. So I instruct a lot of my clients to do something that I call the perimeter sweep. And all that is just taking the dog around the perimeter, essentially, of wherever it is you're going to be working and just letting them see it. I think this is something that this is a courtesy that we don't afford them usually. If you show up at a seminar or training class that you've never been to before, really the least you could do is take the dog around the whole room and just let them see it. And then I like to reinforce the dog for checking back in with me that whole time, if that's something that they're doing. And sometimes it takes them, 3 or 4 laps before they're mentally able to go, oh, you're here too. I just forgot you were here. And so just letting them see the whole thing. I think it's important for us to remember that dogs do not assume safety necessarily. We walk into an agility training building or competition, and we assume that it is safe. And they don't necessarily do that right off the bat. And they probably, they do after they have a history of seeing that it's safe. But right away, it's really important to just let them actually see the entire space as best as you can. You can't always, take them in the ring, but you can take them outside of it and that kind of thing.
Right. And it seems like a lot of work, but when you think about it from the perspective of, if I can't walk my dog in a circle and have them pseudo pay attention to me at all, like what chance do I have doing something as complicated as agility? So I'm going to have, it's like return on investment. I'm going to put in a little bit of investment here to get a better return later. I could put less of an investment, but I'm going to have less of a return later. So kind of think about it from that perspective.
Definitely. I agree.
Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Sarah, and sharing some of these tidbits with us. And of course, people can hear a lot more about all of this on your podcast, which they can find in iTunes. And that was Cog-Dog Radio. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, and also on your website, which is the Cognitive Canine. And that's actually spelled out, not K and the number 9. Right? .com. And we'll also have a link to that on the show notes page. So, again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, you guys, for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Back on Track and Elite Science with 1TDC. And today's podcast was also brought to you by NTI Global. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com for the widest selection of dog agility tunnels for both competition and backyard training. Known for free shipping, more options, high-quality products, and low prices, NTI Global has got you covered. They also offer chutes, tunnel chutes, tamer and anchor weight bags, along with a full line of accessories and agility storage solutions. Need your agility gear in a hurry? Don't forget to check the in-stock selection. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com and use promo code NTI Agility 5 for 5% off savings today. You'll find links to all of our sponsors on the show notes for today's episode at baddogagility.com/144. Happy training!
Why aren't there any more good chemistry jokes? Because they are gone.